Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Craig Fisher. I'm here with Chris Allen from AMS. We are here to talk about hiring in the mid market. This has become an increasingly important topic as pressures on the mid market have increased. Profits are slightly decreasing. Time to hire is growing, and that market is sort of dominated by investments, right? So the investment companies, the private equity firms who are buying up and operating these companies to have some eventual monetary outcome are feeling squeezed. And so it's an interesting time in the US economy to have this specific conversation. And Chris, I don't know about you, but I feel like the mid market doesn't get enough attention. Why don't you introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about your thoughts there?
So Chris Allen from AMS. AMS, for those of you that don't know, is an RPO company. Don't leave. We're going to talk about some positives on that. The mid-market. The personal view I get on this is that if you've got a big extremes, if you're hiring like one or two people, there's a certain way of doing that. If you're a monster multinational, there's a way of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, a lot of the value of a lot of the strategies that exist in the market can be most relevant in the mid-market, and there is a lot of the opportunity. And some of the issue, without getting too philosophical, seems to be, but I'm not either of those things, so it's hard for me. So I think part of what we want to do today is give a bit of a confidence boost to anybody that's working in that market to realize, actually, you might have more opportunities than you think. My definition of mid-market, by the way, is I like yours around the investors, but is anything that's not an absolute monster or absolutely tiny. It's
Right.
such a huge area. But what you can't do is shrink a big thing, right? You try and be huge, you will fail. If you try and say, well, I wish I was smaller, I think there's a real knack to living in the middle.
Yeah, I agree, and you're right. The middle is a big place. So there are probably more companies in that sort of 500 to 5,000 person organization than anywhere else, and it is an interesting thing because growth is normally the goal for any company, but do you want to become enterprise? And when you get approaching that, you know, 3, 4, 5,000 person organization, you have to start doing things differently. And so I like that messy middle. Yeah, I have customers that are at all levels, but when I work with employers, sometimes the messy middle is the most fun because things can get done quickly, and decisions can get made faster. But we're seeing some interesting things there. So volatility, like we just said, hiring freezes, hurry up and wait cycles. So how are your customers dealing with this?
The sales answer is that's why we exist. But let me give you some more non-sales answers. I think the ones that are dealing with it best have acknowledged that's the way it is. Yeah. So forget your own individual politics, but you only need to open the news every day.
Right.
Volatility is not isolated to talent acquisition. Right. This is a bigger challenge. Whether tech has affected that, politics, but I think if you assume that stability is on the horizon, you might spend a very long time waiting for it. So I think the first thing to say is that the customers that acknowledge that change is inevitable and that things are a bit messy are the ones that tend to be the most successful.
Right.
On the other extreme, and not to speak ill of any of our customers, but the other side of that is sometimes this, we're going to wait, we're going to ride this out, and then wonder why they've fallen behind and are playing catch up is a bit of a trend.
It is a trend. It's a dangerous trend. Wait and see is never a business practice. Wait and see is leaders not pushing forward. And forward's really the only way to go if you've got a business that you're trying to grow. So Andre says he thinks another advantage of the messy middle, getting things done faster, more pilots with AI tools, more advantages of bringing in consultants with expertise. So all this is right. You know,
just on that,
something.
Craig, just on that, let me jump in, because I think that tech bit is so important.
Yeah.
And to kind of make this quite macro for anybody that's joined, individuals are on their own tech journey, right? I work with some people who still handwrite notes and type them up. I work with other people whose entire job is to be at the forefront of tech and AI. And I think because it's become such a ubiquitous term, it's become quite intimidating. I think it's easier to think it's happening over there. And my personal message is experiment yourself to remove the fear of technology, and you'll be amazed at how much you learn in the process, right? In other words, and somebody on this call, very influential with me on this, just replace Google with your version of ChatGPT and just see what it does for you. It might help that kind of fear, that, what's the word I'm looking for, the kind of stasis that comes with people saying there's so much going on with tech, I'm just going to do nothing, or I'm too scared to look into it because I feel like I don't know enough. So I think the mid-market, come back, own it, find stuff out for yourself, play with personal technology tools, and you'll be amazed how much that sort of opens your mind to what can be a very confusing landscape.
Yeah, I think that same mindset might keep you from being better at Excel, for instance, or PowerPoint or anything, right? I mean, you have to try. And we're seeing this wave of what you've said to me before, is first generation hiring. That has nothing to do with Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, in everything to do with companies are hiring for skills and jobs that they've never hired before. And so that includes everyone. And so if you're not experimenting with these tools and have some sort of mastery, well, you're not going to be included in that.
And the first, practical tip, again, is a bit psychological, but the first practical tip, if you're in the mid-market, is understand how much freedom you've got relative to others. If I took an average across our customer base, even agile, relatively point solution based technology can be a 12 to 18 month journey. If you're in this market, realize the advantage you have of being able to be a little more agile and to experiment. Everyone has an infosec requirement, everyone has a technology team, but realize that one of your biggest competitive advantages in this market can be how much more you can experiment than larger firms. There are one or two exceptions to that, but the general rule that I have seen is the bigger you are, the harder it is to implement that change or even to have a go.
That's right. I've got a good personal example, right? So I work with the world's largest bank. We won't name them. But when I started working with them 3 years ago, they really didn't have any in talent acquisition, any access to LLMs, right? AI tools. The company has AI tools to do its banking, but they're not allowed to use any of that in talent acquisition. And so they engaged me as a consultant because I was outside the organization and I could use, right? I have different computers and things like that. I could use AI tools to help them out. And because of that, they got to adopt a little bit, but it took forever. Now, same situation with a mid-market engineering company. And they're like, oh yeah, well, absolutely. We'll just adopt that. No problem. And that's smart. So let's talk real quick about some of the competitive advantages that brings if you're a mid-market company with your ability to innovate.
Well, I think that's the first one we just covered, is once you've decided to make the jump, you can make that jump more quickly and if you've not looked into this before, you may be pleasantly surprised by the low cost of entry. There are so many point solutions out there. The way I look at it with our customers is often it's less than the salary of the person that you're hiring, or certainly the recruiter that's doing the role.
Right.
Do not think in enterprise terms, think in localized terms, and you'll be pleasantly surprised that a relatively low investment with the right organization could be quite seismic in terms of how you do this. So I'll give you an example. I think Tamara may be on the call actually that works here. We plugged in some really, really simple and straightforward workflow technology into a franchise organization. They had 40 or 50 restaurants. They weren't pulled into it, but to your point, it was their investors that recommended it. Mm-hmm. And it was quite a traditional organization who were quite focused on candidate touch. Yeah. Everyone's heard this, I'm interested, but maybe not for me because we like the human touch.
Yeah.
It was actually on a personal basis, and coming back to the mid-market and working with these customers, if you reduce the cost per hire in that bank that you were talking about, Craig, by 1.5%, someone's happy, but it doesn't make you feel particularly good.
Right.
But the feedback of going through that process of somebody going on a journey, taking a risk, seeing how much it could improve just with this really small, low-cost intervention was actually quite good on a human level. Like you could actually see the benefits. Yeah. So what advantage do you have? You can probably make a difference really quickly. Mm-hmm. If you're on this call thinking I need to make a difference, you've got the opportunity to make a difference, perhaps more than the global head of TA at Google. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, absolutely. So given services or technology for talent acquisition or hiring example, if you can move quickly, a lot of companies will let you do a pilot, right? And if you take 9 months to make a decision, well, their profit margin's already gone from dealing with you in calls and RFPs and back and forth, and there's no money for a pilot. So, right, if you're a mid-market company and you can act quickly, you can participate in pilot programs where you get a certain amount of that service or product or subscription-based thing for free for a bit, right? Mm-hmm. And discounts and rebates and all the wonderful things you'd want as a proper consumer, just because you can do something quickly. Now, whether it's real or trumped up, not to use that word too openly, when the car dealership says, hey, we're at the end of the month, we're willing to make a deal. Software companies do the same thing all the time. And that month is fairly arbitrary. They do have deadlines and things like that. But, commit to trying, because that's what pilots are for.
Mm-hmm. Completely. Yeah. And I also think that people probably have access to information that they don't realize. Unless you live in a complete bubble, you will have peers, partners, which we'll come back to, friends who will be able to start you on that journey. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you don't necessarily have to come at this with this huge strategic piece of work that says, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? What's the budget? Speak to people. What have you done? And what did it do for you? And I think through that exercise, you can kind of cut through some of the noise. I think most of our best relationships tend to come from referrals, right? Mm-hmm. Even when we're working with large organizations, just ask people that just people you've worked with, and maybe people outside of TA, what are you doing? What are you up to? What worked for you?
Right.
That's a really great way into this. I think some people, again, can get that, I don't know where to start. We'll start with speaking to a couple of companies that people you trust know, and they can help you understand the benefits that it can bring and how feasible it is for your organization.
All right. So what kind of tech investments are you seeing move the needle for mid-sized companies?
Well, I wish we could run through the process, couldn't we? If I had to give a top three, one, if you're not doing it, is some kind of programmatic advertising.
Yeah.
It's a part of the market that is can still be buying on quite a old school basis. In other words, some people are still setting a budget, picking the channels that they're going to operate, and great. What we've seen, this is true across every market, but again, particularly if someone's saying, well, my brand is not strong, I'm concerned, just having technology that effectively manages the flow of those candidates for you on a budgetary basis can be game changing. You'll start to realize how much you were spending on waste. So I think programmatic advertising, I think if you're anywhere close to the volume space, workflow technology is becoming almost essential. And by workflow technology, I mean something that can provide a great experience for candidates that maybe doesn't exist in your HR system. And we were at Unleash last week, lucky us. I also think there's been a bit of a growth in the back end of the processes. Don't forget that the point of hire does not stop when someone has accepted a role. So much of dropout and challenge in hiring can come post-offer. Look into what technology can do for you once that candidate has said yes, because it's the best return on investment is keeping, if you need to hire 100 people and you only need to get 105 in the funnel, you'll be amazed at how much efficiency that drives elsewhere. So I'd say advertising, workflow, onboarding.
Yeah, and I think with all of those things comes a little bit of change management strategy, process improvement, but it's easy to get overwhelmed by the choices, right? And so how do you recommend companies sort of cut through the clutter to get at, the easy? And I think you kind of answered it before when you said, talk to your friends. That's a good idea. I mean, there's plenty of communities. Meta, Facebook is great for that sort of thing.
Talk to your friends is one of it. And again, this feels completely kind of TA 101, but it's amazing how many don't do it, is understand what you're doing today. I was at a conference last year, week before. It was a retail conference. There was lots of organizations, some mid-market, talking about all these amazing innovations that they'd delivered, and they were doing some good work, but I'd say only 1 in 10 could you easily apply for a job. There was a kind of gremlin somewhere in the system, whether it was how you apply, how things were implemented. So if you're looking at technology, you'll have much more informed conversations if you can articulate what you do today, number one. Also, you'll have a very strong business case internally for why you might want to change something. Because if you're the CFO, you don't necessarily know that someone is working with an ancient system and fudging it with spreadsheets and the risk that brings. So any decision to change something, if you can articulate where you are today, quite simply, that's a really good platform for change.
So that's interesting, and that generally requires some sort of mini audit, right, of current tools and timelines and things like that. And I think I opened this up by saying that time to fill is growing, right? It's expanding. It's taking longer right now because I think organizations are sort of in that wait and see mode. And that's costly, right? I mean, if you're extending past 6 weeks from application to decision and onboarding, then that's, that adds up. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just such a neat segue. If you're going to review your current process, and I'll quote Game of Thrones, chaos is a ladder. Never been a better time to reconsider doing the way you do things, right? So if as standard, which we still see, the standard process to hire someone is 3 rounds of interviews, some assessments and other things, well, why not experiment with what happens if I take a couple of those people out of the process? Does it materially affect things?
Right.
Is this just a comfort blanket that it's the way we've always done things? Or is there a legitimate business reason for that? So understanding your process is one thing. Sort of questioning, does it have to be this way, is important. And I spend a lot of time, Craig, as you know, in the high volume space, and we've seen a real shift towards hiring managers potentially being the biggest fault in that process. So maybe you need to disempower hiring managers, right? Maybe there is a decision which is the most vocal complainers around TA are often the people that are the biggest blockers to it. So, yeah, okay, right, if you're hiring these people, these people are going to come ready formed, right? So be creative, be innovative. Don't assume that a tweak to what you're doing today is unlikely to have a material difference, right? Try and be radical.
Right. That's not changing the fundamentals of your business. That's a simple, like 3 rounds of interviews with different people plus assessments is strong overkill at this point. When we have automation, that's too much friction. So we want some friction, right? We've discussed this at TalentNet Live often. We don't want no friction. That's too easy. People don't believe it's real, so they ghost you. But some friction in the process is important. So, that human element is important, but not so much of it that, you're driving people away. So my wife was in an interview situation in 23, right before we were about to go on a trip to South Africa. And this company wanted her to come in the day before and do an hour-long presentation so that she could keep her place in the interview process. And she's just like, no, I'm not going to do that. Sorry. So I'm out.
There's another anecdote from last week, actually, and it was a very large, they sell pizzas. I won't say who it was, but they were going through a change program, right, which is complicated and difficult. It was a very large program, but they said the biggest thing that they had an impact was at various points in the process was to acknowledge that with candidates. Like, don't sweep it under the carpet. That, sorry, this has been a bit clunky. We're going through a bit of a change program. Just want to make sure you're okay. And they were like, that tiny little intervention, which was so simple and being authentic, made a huge difference. So, yeah, I think that's another piece is try and look at everything through the lens of the people that you're trying to hire rather than just the organization. I think some people have got so obsessed with how does this work for us? Can we report accurately how we want to report? The most important people in the process, who largely are the hiring managers and the candidates, have been kind of pushed aside. You need to come dance to our tune. So part of that process and that audit, just be a candidate for 20 minutes, apply for a role, see what it feels like.
That's right.
And you might have, again, a moment of clarity that you don't need to overhaul. You just need to play with how you articulate things during the process.
Yeah. Empathy, self-awareness, transparency, all those things that you can find in the book, Hiring Humans, available on Amazon.
Oh God, I felt bad selling earlier. Good one. Get the book in. Get the book in.
Yeah, let's talk about brand real quick. How important is employer brand and things like personalization for mid-market companies?
You see my body language? I get so excited about this. So I'm very lucky in my role that you speak to clients, multiple sectors, multiple different sizes. The most consistent thing is that everybody feels that their brand is a challenge.
Right.
Everyone. And what I mean by that is, again, I shouldn't name them, but large sportswear company that we worked with for many years was like, that's the biggest problem. Everyone wants to work here and they think a job is going to be fundamentally, they almost think they're going to be playing soccer every day.
Yeah.
So our consumer brand is a challenge because it generates too many candidates and we need to funnel it down. At the other extreme, nobody knows who we are. It's really difficult. You own what you have, understand yours, and personalize it, if possible, at a job level, would be my advice. If anybody's hiring in technology, you'll know. Someone wants to know, what will I be doing? Am I a cog in a machine, or have I got some freedom to be creative? The brand above the door is obviously important, but I think it's massively overstressed in terms of people's concerns. I think there's a real opportunity to localize your hiring by market, by persona, and to really communicate with candidates. This is what you will bring to the team that you'll be operating in. So I think that's where the mid-market has the biggest opportunity. You're big enough to exist. You're not huge enough to come with preconceptions around what that brand means. And you have a really, really unique opportunity to articulate that in an interesting way.
I think even big companies get that wrong, right? As well. We do a lot of career sites, job description overhauls, ATS viewing, um, sort of intervention where companies are just spitting out what the ATS has onto a website, and that's terrible. And the common theme is messaging, right? They're not in their job descriptions talking to the candidate first, and in their culture page where they're saying why we're great, they're not talking about the person who we're trying to attract. And so understanding your audience better and saying, look, you're this type of person, you seek these kinds of challenges, we're looking for people like you, imagine what we could do together. And there's a lot of we and you language in there and very little us. And I think that's you're right, that's a really simple opportunity that gets overlooked.
It is. And I've got no stats to back this up, but my strong assumption is most people are interested in the role and the organization is secondary in this market. What will I be doing? Who will I be working with? What opportunity does it bring to me? But a lot of the focus is on what font are we using? How does it compare to our competition?
Right.
Is it innovative? And I think it's a really easy pivot to make and to lead. If you're leading a team, just bring your personality to the role. Stop. Hiring managers need to be able to hire in a way that is compliant and effective. But they're them. You will be working with me. Tell me about you.
Mm-hmm.
Again, sweeping generalization, but I do think if you're in that mid-market, you've got much more opportunity to bring that to life. We're big enough for you to be successful and small enough to care is a really, really important message in a candidate-driven market.
And so I feel like, and I know you do too, that we need to do some storytelling and some training with our hiring managers, because very often mid-market managers have either come directly from a role where they were a doer, right? And they have no training in managing or hiring, or they've come from sometimes an enterprise role where they had less requirement to actually do things themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, they come with this attitude that I've got a budget and a timeline and a project, and I know the type of person who can get this job done, and I need to get things done. And they're not thinking about how to personalize that, that attraction process. They're not thinking about why do they need to know about me? That's not important. I just need a body here, and that's I mean, I know that's a wild generalization, but it's also true, and it happens all the time.
It's very true. And again, I'll give you a good example of how an organization we work with enforced this. They made it very clear that TA was an enabling function, and that people didn't want to do it, they could do it their own way. In other words, if all I'm going to hear is you complaining about the service you're getting, fine, over to you. Quite a ruthless way to work. Mm-hmm. But I think taking back some ownership of that and saying, we are the support function, we are the experts. There's no point in mandating processes to someone who does not want process mandated. And again, in that, there's a space in the middle of the market where TA is adding value, but you've got a lot more freedom than if you're this 500 person machine that exists in a large organization. So really personalize that. 10% of your managers are probably causing 90% of your headaches. So
that's
your point, either educate them,
true. Yeah,
or all right, fine, over to you. Next time you need help, like, you can post it, you can screen it. There's a certain amount of freedom to horse trade on a local level that you don't get if you are running a huge enterprise.
That's right. Something I get asked to talk to hiring manager teams about a lot is that they have to look, I'm sorry you're an engineering manager or whatever, but also you have to do some selling. And here's what good salespeople do. They build rapport and relationships. And you can't do that if you don't kind of show who you are a little bit and let the prospect know what they're getting into and have a relationship with you before they even decide to buy.
Mm-hmm. And these three things are all linked, aren't they? If you think brand, process, and tech, what I'm very conscious of, because we see it quite frequently, is this all sounds great, but that sounds like a 12-month program, and I haven't got 12 months and I haven't got any time to do any of this. I don't know, Craig, if that's common with you, like people will get in their own way. I think the other thing that I would really advocate is the kind of sports concept of marginal gains. Like, don't be intimidated by, I'm going to have to overhaul my tech, I'm going to have to redo my career site. And if you start with, I've got 5 or 6 people that I can see are problematic in the process, spend an hour with each of them. That's a day well spent that could have a huge difference on your outcomes. So I think if you're able to look at things and say, yeah, work on the macro, do the big strategy, but actually isolate what you think are the biggest challenges and spend the time on them rather than getting too confused. Some of the most successful organizations I've worked with done that. They're just very good at prioritizing what the issue is. And the tech piece should come on top of that. Because if you just plug tech in without thinking about those things, you're just going to strap a rocket to an issue, right? It's just
blockers are still blockers.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So I think you're right. And I love the way you just simplified that, because step 1 is move forward regardless, right? Right. Step 2 is see what's in the way. It's not the other way around, because you could spend weeks trying to figure out what's in the way. You still need to be moving forward, right? So just move in the right direction. And then as you're going along in tandem, iterate and get the low hanging fruit, like having that conversation. Hey, get on board, right? We need you to not be holding up the works here, because we're about to spend a lot of money and make your team better. And so I think, would you say that's the first way to get started for an organization?
I mean, it leans, anyone that knows me, it leans into my personality. So maybe I'm biased, but I do think that we've seen the trend being, well, put it the other way, inaction is not going to help anybody.
Right.
If the alternative is do nothing, then you need to accept that you're going to suffer the status quo. But I think, yes, I'd say especially when we're implementing, right? Let's say what we would call a medium-sized account. The philosophy on that is, during that process, make a difference every day, right? You still have your project plan. You still have your processes. You still need to map the future. You still need to be organized, but you need to, what have we done today that's made a difference compared to yesterday? And I think if you go into things with that mindset, it helps pull you out of that stasis. So yeah, personal bias, 100%. But I think we're seeing the evidence that, from a business case perspective as well, if you're having to go to somebody, how's this going? Well, I'll tell you in 12 weeks whether it worked. That, someone's either invested, spent money, spent time. You'll get stuff done, but also you can talk benefits much more quickly with your leadership.
So if you take it personally, and say, and hope that each and every person in the organization can do this, say, look, this is the company goal. This means that I have a personal goal to contribute every day. What am I doing to move this forward? Let's say you want to, as an individual, right? You live at home with a partner and you have some financial goals and you want to buy a property this year. Your partner says, no, we don't have the money for that. And you negotiate a little bit and decide that, okay, if we can save X by X date, then we can buy a property. And as a bonus, we can go spend Christmas in London. This is a real world example, if you can't tell. But every day I have to think, okay, what am I doing to get towards that goal? Right? If you can take it down to sort of that level of thinking, okay, this goal, if we achieve it, is going to benefit me in these ways. And, leadership needs to think about that too. How can we make this real to people? Because there's a balance, right? How do you balance candidate experience and hiring manager needs? Well, make it tangible, right? What's really important here? And I'm not sure talent acquisition is always good enough at understanding the business goals and business needs.
I'll give you a good example on that. So I think a mid-market organization that we worked with about 2 years ago. The question was, we don't have any budget, right? Which was true if you look at a traditional spreadsheet that says we're putting X into recruitment. The exercise with them was, what costs your business money? And in that instance, it was overtime. Yeah. So the conversation moved away from, can I have X because I want to do Y, to, if I'm able to do this better, I can reduce overtime by 30 to 40%.
Right.
Yeah. And that came out through quite a fluid dialogue. Neither of us went into the conversation going at it that way, but there was a very real moment where it was like that. If that doesn't work, we're not going to get anything.
Right.
If we cannot prove that we can reduce spend over here by 5 million and we want to spend 1, well, maybe I need to look for another job. But it shifted the conversation to something very tangible, because it could go in a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'm going to put 1 in here because I can reduce this by 3. So, and it doesn't mean, you don't need an MBA. You don't need to go deep into the business. You just need to understand what's hot at the moment. What are we looking to achieve? How will improving hiring help that?
Yeah, it's fair. We do this all the time, right? It's fairly straightforward. You don't have a budget? Great. Okay, so within the next 12 months, you could save $250,000 on, let's say, seats on a popular social media recruiting site by spending $50,000 on process improvement with your applicant tracking system and another $50,000 on some sourcing software with a CRM. Okay, so that's a net $150,000 gain. Now you have budget for other cool stuff, right? Instead of, we don't have any budget.
And implicit in that, obviously, both of us would love to do this. Lean into partners. So I'm going to steal a phrase from Andre, who popped up earlier.
Yeah.
Because it was very current. Like, people talk about, organizations need to be moving from vendors to partners. I think a lot of the market has shifted from partner to peer. So credit to Andre. I think partner to peer is a really good shift.
Yeah.
Lean into people, tell them what your problem is, and let organizations help you solve it. RPO is an industry that's built on building business cases. Right? We literally do not exist if we cannot justify the return on investment. So us and others like us are really good at answering that question before you get into the solution you want to solve, and can probably do it based on individual and corporate experience of, this is how I'd go about it. That overtime thing is not right for you. So I think, on the one hand, that's really important. Where I have empathy, specific empathy, again, without doing a disservice to what was a great conference last week, is that you need to get beyond, you need to have the right salesperson or get beyond the sales team. And what I mean by that is, I would say about 80% of the organizations that I saw last week didn't ask me who I was, didn't ask me why I was at that conference, and launched into something that began with agentic AI and ended somewhere else. And I had no idea what they did. So on the one hand, I'm sort of advocating speaking to partners, but understanding that can feel like I get 200 cold calls a day from companies who are telling me they're going to make a difference. So, speak to your friends, work with partners, speak to people call Chris or Craig. But there is a world out there where people have a vested interest in making your situation better, not just selling you a point product that happens to be on their kind of targets for the month.
It's so frustrating, right, to walk through really, it's mostly tech events, but any event with a vendor floor that is just booth after booth, because, right, they feel like they've got this limited time and they need to spit out all this information to you and scan your badge and move along. And that's no way to build a rocket ship, right? So you've got to teach your people, even at the booth level, that understand the problem first, understand a need and interest and why that person is standing in front of you. And, I always like to look at it like this. Does this person have an issue that I could build a case study around, right? I don't want to solve anything that I can't prove and talk about, even if I don't name the company's name. But I want to be able to prove how we did it, prove that it worked, and talk about it. And so, you teach a team of junior salespeople, look, if you're just giving people the cold call experience as they walk by the booth, you're never going to get to the point where you're a partner enough to build a case study with them about the solution you provided.
But it's a sort of yes and, right? In the sense that is a challenge, but behind that, there are most of the organizations that I saw last week could make a huge and material difference to people joining this call. Any of them, right? Any of them would probably be able to drive what we talked about at the start of this, a point solution that if you're feeling you can't scale, life is difficult, I'm spending too much money, you could blindfolded walk up to one of those booths and they would have something that would help.
Yeah.
The challenge is how do you navigate that? How do you get the ones that are actually going to be right for you? So lean into your peers, speak to experts, but just be aware that's just because somebody is trying to sell you something doesn't mean what they're selling isn't going to be valuable. Choose your partners wisely and choose them because you think they're going to help you, right? They're going to help you, not because their product will, but because they are able to, steal a phrase we've used with our clients here, we want to make you a hero.
That's right. And the reality is you're not really working with them just for what they advertise that they're selling. You're working with them because you value them as a colleague and they're going to help you, right? I mean, I only ever really get engaged to do things because people want time with me, right? They like the experience of bouncing things off of me. I've got a knowledge base that is broad and specific at the same time, and I can help people, and I'm really interested in helping people. Again, if I can't prove it and talk about it later, it's not worth doing. And so, how we start off the TalentNet Live conference, which you and I will both be at in November at Caliber Collision headquarters. Go to talentnetlive.com on November 7th for tickets. We're all colleagues in this room. It doesn't matter if you're a vendor or a practitioner or an entrepreneur. We're all here for the same goal, to make work better. And we're all colleagues here. And that's, if you don't have that mindset, this is not the place for you. And so I hope we can all sort of engage in that sort of mindset.
I'd echo that. And if I was trying to give like a really practical point plan, right, across everything we talked about, I think the first thing is, and again, I'll go psychological, know if you want to make a difference. If actually you're happy with the status quo, stick with the status quo. And like there is really something in that. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you are thinking, right, I want to go and make a difference, I'd suggest the first thing you do is get 3 people you trust and have a broad conversation with them around anything they change that makes a difference. Don't prejudice that conversation with your organizational scenario, right? Just open that box and start thinking. I think the second thing, once you've got that sense, is just prioritize, even on a notepad, what's our recruiting process and strategy, and where do I think it's broken?
Yeah.
Right. And then pull those 2 things together. These people like this. Do you know what? Deep down, I've got a hiring manager issue. Deep down, I've got an application issue. Deep down, I've got something like that. And then pull those 2 things together. Be inquisitive and don't be afraid to break some rules. That If you do that, you'll be pleasantly surprised, in my opinion, on two things. One, that the ownership of the process is quite liberating. It doesn't stop the day job. Day job's still going. And the second thing is that it kind of aligns the piece at the start that you'll start to want to experiment. Because if you've joined this call, you might be frustrated. That makes sense. Like, you don't join this if you're like, everything's fine. Right.
Yeah.
It can be really liberating to have a small win. And then from there, you meet your partners and you think, my job, talk about me, my job's radically changed in the last 18 months. From access to tech partners. What's going on? What do you do? How do you work? It's genuinely interesting, and it enables you to start connecting dots. And I think a lot of people have really sat in a bit of a bubble saying, I'm a bit different. The organization's broken. I've just got to suck it up. You can break that cycle with a couple of phone calls, a couple of experiments. It's really, really professionally satisfying.
Yeah, and Chris and I are both going to be good examples of this for you, the audience, right? We are both open and accessible to just talk about things without expectation of selling anything or anything beyond that. And to that end, Chris, how can people engage with you and AMS if they have a need?
Feel free to come straight through to me. So chris.allen@weareams.com. Maybe we'll drop this somewhere, Craig, so people can. But the sincerity of that is, we're on a webinar. People might not believe it, but if that is a case of there's a bit of a challenge here, if I don't know the answer, I can connect you with somebody who does. This is not a quick sell environment, so always happy to facilitate an intro or give some advice. We'll also drop the AMS website in there where there is a contact us, and it'll make sure it gets through to me.
Yeah, we're all connectors here, and we're all open advisors. And I talk to people every day who said, I want to get some time with you. I saw you speak about this or that, and I'm just interested. I'm in a new role here, and I'm not sure what to do. And I don't expect anything from those calls except someday those people let me know, hey, this helped or this worked. And even if they don't, it's fine. No problem. I still want to hear from you.
Likewise.
Andre says, engage warmly and humanly, identify a pain point, express empathy, begin discussion on how to solve together. I like it. He's also listed your email address. If you need me, if you're on this broadcast, you probably already know how to get a hold of me, but if not, I'm easy to find. Just connect me through LinkedIn and send me a note. I'm responsive. And again, we'll be at a couple of TalentNet Live conferences. Chris is joining me in Dallas, November 7th. And we'll be in Chicago on June 2nd for TalentNet Live Chicago. All the information on those is at talentnetlive.com. Hope you'll join us. And we'll be back again with another live stream. Chris and I do this every once in a while, and AMS is a great partner to TalentNet Live and a proud sponsor, and we're glad to have you aboard. And thanks as always just for your partnership, Chris, and friendship. And this has been fun.
Thank you. No, you made my Friday. I'm also going to learn from you. I'm very conscious when I do this. You're like really solid. I'm Mr. Twitchy. So I need some coaching from Craig on how to stay still in webinars. Sorry, not sorry.
All right, everybody. Thank you. And we'll see you next time.
See you soon.